All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday night. Nothing special going on tonight. We're just going to sit and hang out. But we're lucky enough that we have somebody who wants to sit and talk to you about poetry tonight. So let's get this kicked off. Let me go and introduce her. Introduce myself first off. For those I haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name's Ken Humphrey. I'm the Director of Operations with WWA, along with our president, Luella Schmidt. I'm also the co-host of the Midwest Writers Room, and I'm happy to MC this event tonight for Katrina. So let's talk a little bit about Katrina herself. So Katrina has worked as a therapist, a professor, and a researcher in the field of occupational therapy for over 2 decades. She started poem walking, and this is a term that you'll hear quite a bit tonight, I'm assuming. Poem walking after a delightful midlife crisis. Serwe published a chapbook called First Steps, which came out from Brandmill Press 2025, and that won the Brandmill Press Plus Wisconsin Fellowship of Poets chapbook contest. And a full-length collection of foraged poems called A Thousand Miles of Poetry, Poem Walking Wisconsin's Ice Age National Scenic Trail, which came out on April 1st of this year from our very own WWA Press. Her poems have been featured in a variety of publications, including Plowshares, Blue Heron Review, The Solitary Plover, Bramble, Portage Magazine, and Scrawl Place. You can follow her journey at katrinaserwe.com. All right. So, as noted on the screen that everybody's seeing here, please, in the chat, tell us where you're coming from, what you write, and whatever sound you enjoy, because there's very much a nature bent to a lot of Katrina's poems, as you'll discover here. And also, as we go along, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. If they're pertinent to a topic that Katrina is currently discussing, I may break in and have her cover that. Otherwise, we have reserved time at the end of this for full Q&A. So, with that said, Katrina, take it away.
Wonderful. Happy Poetry Month, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for dropping your information in the chat. I'm seeing some familiar faces, some new faces. We're going to be interactive this evening. I'm going to share some ideas with you and read you some poems, and then we'll take time to play with words, do a little writing, and share together. So I hope it's nice and interactive. I am a late bloomer in my poetry life. As Ken mentioned, I worked as a therapist, professor, and researcher in the field of occupational therapy for over 2 decades before I actually started writing poetry in 2020. I call my process poem walking, and today we'll take a poem walking journey together. You might be wondering, well, what happened in 2020 that I started writing poetry seriously for the first time as an adult? Like everybody else, it was a challenging year for me. I had a back injury followed by a difficult season of caregiving. I turned to poetry and hiking to help me get through. Poetry was something I could enjoy with a limited ability to sit and concentrate. It helped me stay in the present moment and gave me a tool to process pain through writing. Walking gave me a rhythm to soothe my nerves, and it helped my back feel better. I was walking the trails around my home, writing poems in this made up hobby I called poem walking, when I saw a pamphlet at a trailhead and I realized I was on the Ice Age Trail, and this trail's 1,000 some miles. I decided to accept the challenge on the pamphlet and walk all of the Ice Age Trail segments, but just in Washington and Ozaukee counties. So it's like 50 miles. I wrote a haiku and a full-length poem for every segment. And my chapbook, First Steps, was inspired by these hikes in the Northern Kettle Moraine. I had so much fun that when that was finished, I did decide to hike the full trail. So the goal expanded to everything. And the result is the full-length collection, A Thousand Miles of Poetry, that just came out with a poem for every segment of the Ice Age Trail. So to explore this process of poem walking together, I'm going to guide you through the process of collecting words for a poem. I'll read you poems throughout, and then we'll talk about how to shape those words further into poems, and we'll take some time to do just that. Poem walking. Well, I thought this was something new, something amazing that I made up for myself. It turns out that walking while writing poetry is not something new. Basho, a famous haiku poet from Japan, was walking and writing poetry back in the 1600s. And many other famous poets that you may have heard of, including William Wordsworth, Walt Whitman, Henry David Thoreau, Robert Frost, Lucille Clifton, Mary Oliver, and Naomi Shihab Nye have combined walking and writing poems. Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poets, has a famous quote. She says, "Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it." And I think this is also a good definition for what poem walking is. To help you understand it a little bit further, I'm going to read you a poem from my chapbook, First Steps, and it's called Poem Walking. I forget about the half-written story, the hopeful to-do list on my calendar, how long the backyard grass has grown, the unwashed dishes, and follow curiosity down the curve of a hill, eager to discover what's around the bend, the shiver of aspen or thick pine shade. I scratch my fingertips on goldenrod lace, turn to see if the skittering squirrel is red, gray, or black. Ponder the marsh, the still stench of purification. Listen to crows call each other home. Wait for the swallowtail to pause his thirst for nectar. I look for the spaces of overlap, where water meets land, when hills stretch out to plain, how sunshine turns to shade, and see my thoughts change with the terrain as I scribble in my notebook to catch the poem of my walk, to reflect back on another day. Poem walking can really be done anywhere. So you don't necessarily have to be walking, although that's fun. As you've noticed, poem walking is just that. It's about noticing wherever you are. When I walk, I always have a little notebook with me, tucked in my pack or my pocket, my coat, and I write down notes about what I see, what I hear, what I smell or taste, and what I feel. Sometimes those observations coalesce in a poem right on the trail, but more often the notes become a word bank that I shape into a poem later. Either way, there are lots of revisions. Today, we're going to work with that idea of collecting words from your surroundings and your senses in a word bank that you can shape into poems. So we're going to start by taking 5 minutes to write down notes about what we see, hear, smell, taste, and feel around us right now. I want you to try to get at least 5 observations from each sense. You might have to combine taste and smell depending on if you brought snacks or not. But see how many you can get and really try to be as detailed as possible. So I'm going to set the timer and I will let you know when 5 minutes are up. See if you can keep writing the entire time and get a really good word bank that we can play with. All right, I'll be quiet and you can write. All right, we're at 5 minutes. Hopefully you've gathered a nice full word bank. I had the opportunity to catch up with the chat, so now I'm up to speed. It's exciting to see we've got fiction writers, nonfiction writers, poets. We've got Greg who volunteers with the Rock County Ice Age Trail. That's awesome. Sarah, your favorite sound is my favorite sound too. The wind through the pines. I love that sound. I was listening to it today. We've got Dawn, who's working on being a 1,000 miler. And Rosie, the sound of a dog sleeping. That is a fascinating, I bet that is quite relaxing. So thank you for participating in the chat. I'll keep watching that as well. We're going to take this word bank now, and we are going to play with shaping a poem. And whether you are writing poetry or prose, I think you'll have fun with seeing how the same word bank, the same experience can look different depending on the shapes that we try it out with. So put that in the back of your mind and we'll come back to that later. There are about a million ways that we can shape poems, and there's no right way to do it. We are just going to pick 4 to play with tonight. So we are going to play with list poems, narrative poems, haiku, and sound poetry. So we will start out with list poems. List poems are exactly what they sound like. You are creating a list. The fun thing about list poems is once you have your list, trying on different titles can change the meaning of a list, because even though it's a list, our crazy human minds try to make meaning out of everything, and that can be very fun sometimes. I am going to read you 2 list poems from my book, 1,000 Miles of Poetry, to give you some ideas about what these types of poems can look like. The first one was inspired by a hike on the Janesville segment. The Janesville segment goes right through town as well as the edge of town. So some of you may have walked it without even knowing you were walking it. The poem is called What I Didn't Expect to Find. A bedroll carefully tucked under the bridge. Thin-skinned sycamore standing brave in the cold. In the city park, weeping willow ringed by beaver. 2 deer unafraid, hesitant to give up their ground. A young woman who walked me through her neighborhood so I would be safe. Green-haired winter river flowing with vernal water starwort. Cattail marsh and scattered woods making trails all through town. Golf course and botanical gardens. Water ski bleachers watching the wide rock river. Murals floating bright across bricks. A lost coat rolling between 2 lanes of traffic. The Historical Society reporting half the story in lives of settlers, but not the natives. And the next list poem was inspired by a hike in the North Woods of Wisconsin on the Rib Lake section of the trail. It's called I Like My Gifts Unwrapped. Timberwolf howls uncaged in morning air. Unfenced field of buttercup sparkling with dew. Trail across land unprivatized, free for all to roam. Stand of old growth maple uncut in a logged young forest. Unbridged streams crossed by stepping stones. Long ago logging camps feral with undergrowth. Tote road empty of all but foot traffic. Untrimmed blooms of Allegheny blackberry brambles. Hemlocks rerooting into their native soil. Ephemeral ponds spilling over tree roots. Bridges and boardwalk lifting over low spots. Choice of ridgetop or valley trail. Unrestrained time to hike both. Mid-forest thermometer tells the temperature already felt. Unrestrained laughter. Out and back hike uninterrupted by cell service. Timberwolf tracks topping mine, owner unseen. Curiosity and distance freely given. So now it's your turn. I'll have you look at your word bank that you created and organize your observations into a list. So you can start just intuitively choosing things that are interesting to you, and then you can start to include and exclude things to organize around particular themes. And then you get to experiment with different titles and see how titles can change the poem. If you get stuck, a trick I like to use is try to find the worst title possible and then go from there. You'll be surprised what you find. So we will take 5 minutes again so you can play with your word bank and see what comes up. I'll let you know when the 5 minutes are up. And we are at time, so we'll come back. Remember, if you're not finished, you can come back to this poem anytime you like, but we'll move along to the next form. So the next form or shape of a poem that we'll look at is a narrative poem. Narrative poems, like list poems, are exactly what they sound like. Narrative poems tell a story. I'll read two narrative poems from my Ice Age trail hikes. The first one is from First Steps, my chapbook. And the poem was inspired by a hike on the Milwaukee River segment of the Ice Age Trail in Washington County. The poem is called Fly Song. July flies orbit my head, 100 buzzing thoughts in my favorite stretch of forest. The faster I walk, the more they multiply until I stop and we listen to my breath and bird song through leaves playing in air. Watch sunlight scatter in the still understory. I stand. The flies resume their orbit. I don't know what it means. Why is bird song beautiful and fly song maddening? Glacial grit slides under my feet. Sweat soaks through my sundress. At the green hand pump, I let iron-flavored water spill into my thirst. Find the gift of a brown and white striped turkey feather. Laughing, swipe it through my cloud of flies. Ask it, what is the difference between the song of the bird and the fly? It answers, nothing. I did not take this feather from the trail. This one was left in my backyard. And the next poem was inspired by a hike on the Greenwood segment of the Ice Age Trail. It's in my book, 1,000 Miles of Poetry. It was first published in the Blue Heron Review, and it's called What Can 1 Square Acre of Prairie Do? In the outwash of almond moraine, someone built a split log couch and ottoman to sit at the fringe of oak savanna and to breathe in the fresh air, rest, while viewing the hard work of 1 acre of prairie restoration rooted deep, 8 to 14 feet into earth, sinking 5 tons of carbon down out of the atmosphere, safe from burning above, soaking up excess water that would erode soil, filling it with organic matter, holding nutrients to sprout diversity, 40 to 80 different plant species in this small space, creating food for millions of insects, birds, and mammals, space for pollinators to spread abundance to orchards and gardens and farms, supporting humans who may not realize their animal nature needs roots to sink deep into the earth and hold us together. So you might notice how in the first poem, Fly Song, the story follows my experience. And in the second poem, the story is about the place. Now it's your turn. Look back at your word bank and see, is there a story in these words? And when you're looking to find the story in your word bank, you can play with perspective in many ways. The story might focus on your experience, like Fly's song did. It might tell a story about something that you noticed or a place, or you might tell the story from someone else's perspective, or even another animal or an object's perspective. You might include your own memories or thoughts that these experiences bring up. The story takes a little bit longer, so I'll give you 10 minutes for this writing period. But I do want you to realize that the 10 minutes, I want you to see it as room to play because you are not going to write a masterpiece in 10 minutes. And that is part of the joy of it, right? There's no pressure, 10 minutes, but just see what happens. I'll start the timer and you can find the story in your word bank. We are at time, so wrap up that thought. We'll come back and move on to the next poem shape. The next shape that we will look at is haiku. I love haiku. I wrote a haiku for every segment of the trail, and those are on my website for free. And you will notice if you look at those haiku that I started writing out haiku in 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllable format. How many of you were taught that? See a show of hands. Yes, that's what I learned in school as well. And that's a beautiful form. It's fun to play with. It gives you a rhythm. It's kind of a nice beat. It goes well with walking. But as I studied haiku more, I learned that there's a lot more than syllables to haiku. Really, the essence of a haiku is taking two concrete images and putting them together. If you're familiar with the cool German word Gestalt, what a great word, Gestalt. It's when you bring things together and you get more than just the sum of the parts, right? So if we bring 2 or 3 people together, we have a group, but if that's a family, that's something much bigger than just 3 separate people. It has its own entity to it. And so in haiku, when we work with images, it communicates a lot in a very efficient way. And the interesting thing is that translation, where we said that 17 syllables is a haiku way back when, it really doesn't work out as a direct translation because the Japanese language and the English language, the length of syllables and how they work in the language is so different that if you were really trying to be more in tune with that, the sounds in the Japanese language are so much shorter. It would create a much shorter poem than what ours is in 17 syllables. So kind of fascinating. So I'm not going to discourage you from playing with 575, but today we're going to try something different. We're going to put away the syllable counts and we are going to create some haiku purely grounded in images. And now I'll give you a couple tricks because that can be tricky to do. So I'm going to have you try to connect these images through either an association, a comparison, or a contrast. And so we'll look at a few haiku to see that. This is a photo haiku because we have the photo of where it took place. And this is probably my absolute favorite bookstore simply because, well, for there's more than one reason, but it is the only bookstore that I know that is on a hiking trail. This is on the Algoma segment of the Ice Age Trail. You can hike the trail and go to a bookstore. How cool is that? And so the haiku I wrote, it says, choose your own adventure on the hiking trail, a bookstore. So we have the visual image of a hiking trail that conjures something in our mind. We have a concrete image of a bookstore that conjures something in our mind. And they're linked in that they're both places where you can choose your own adventure. So not the deepest haiku in the world, but just kind of some fun play, and it gets your mind dreaming in some different directions. I'll share a sequence of haiku that I wrote in a trail poem. This was inspired by many hikes on the Low Lake segment. Low Lake is kind of where the northern and southern Kettle Moraine meet, and I love hiking in this area. So I've hiked this trail in all of the seasons. And in this linked poem, each stanza is a separate haiku. And so think about the images as I read this to you and how they're linked. Poem walking across the seasons. Under last year's leaves, spring's first light, hepatica stars. The stream full with the song of yesterday's rain. The glacial outwash plain flows full of wildflowers. Afternoon moon, lightning bugs pillow on Queen Anne's lace. Lightning scarred, the old maple flashes autumn gold. Walking on water, sun warm on my face across the winter pond. So while you play with your word bank, I'll encourage you to choose two images and I'll have you challenge yourself. Pick two that you think don't go together at first. It will make it more fun. Now they can be the same sense, but they don't have to be. So you could do two visual images. You could do an auditory, a sound and a smell, a sound and something that you see. It doesn't matter, but just make sure that they are clear images. And then don't worry about writing a haiku. Just take your two images and create a list. Write down all the possible ways that you can think of that these two images compare, that they contrast with each other, or that they're associated. So just brainstorm and don't even think about the shape yet. And then once you have some ideas, focus in on the one that's most interesting to you and then start to simplify it. Take away any extra words, get it down to its bare essence, and see if you can pare it back until you have something that is 17 syllables or less. So don't worry about the exact number, but try to get it just bite-sized. Now, this might take a little bit of time, so I will give you 10 minutes for this one as well. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I'll answer them while you're working. All right, I'll start the timer for you. Have fun. And we're at time. We'll come back together. Can always come back to that poem whenever you like. We have one shape left to explore. And I saved the one that can be the most silly for last. If you're getting a little tired, hopefully this will help you feel relaxed. Our last shape is sound poetry. To create a sound poem, you organize the poem just purely based on the sounds. And so sound poems sometimes make sense and sometimes they don't make sense. And that's okay. I think we are all familiar with sound-driven poems from childhood nursery rhymes that focus on rhythm, sounds, and rhyme. I'll share an example of She Sells Seashells, also known as Sally Sells Seashells. Raise your hand if you've heard the seashell, a couple, yes. So I will read it to you. It's a tongue twister and it was made popular by Terry Sullivan in 1909. So it's been around for a long time. We'll see if I can do it. Wish me luck. She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are seashells, I'm sure. So if she sells seashells on the seashore, then I'm sure she sells seashore shells. did it. So the important part of the, thank you, I appreciate it. The important part of the poem is, of course, not the seashell selling, but rather just the fun of trying to twist our tongues around those interesting and sounds and then laughing at any mispronunciation. So sound poetry can be that silly, but it doesn't have to be. Either way, it's driven by rhythm and sound, and it tends to be more lyrical than narrative. I will share a sound poem from A Thousand Miles of Poetry. This was inspired by a hike on the Hemlock Creek segment, which is the northwestern part of the state. And the poem is called River Mind. Four paws paddling, moving onward down the river, bobbing, playing, twisting, turning, backs and bellies swirling swiftly through the current, water bubbles, river rolling, body chasing, four together, treading water, furry brown heads looking over. Thoughts are like the river otters, twisting, turning, moving through my churning mind. I stop and watch them playing in the stream of conscious flowing out through brain to body. Thoughts I thought were mine are not me. Let them travel on their journey down the river. So when I was creating this poem, I was hoping to find words that moved and sounded like those otters playing in the river. Thank you. And so the words you hear, there's some alliteration, there's a pattern of syllables that hopefully creates this kind of moving water feeling for you. And that's what sound poetry can do. So it's your turn now. This is our last solo writing exercise. I'll have you go back to your word bank and look for rhythms or sounds that appeal to you. And then play with the rhythms or sounds to create patterns of words that you enjoy. And remember, these poems do not need to make sense. You are simply playing and finding something that's pleasing to your ears. So would you like 10 minutes for this one again? Is that good? Okay. I will set the timer and I will let you know when 10 minutes are up. Enjoy. Great. So we will come back together again. And now that we've looked at 4 different poem shapes, we'll consider a group poem. I thought my poem walking would be a solitary journey. I was surprised to find I made trail friends along the way, and I continue to hike the trail with these wonderful people. Similarly, I thought writing was a solo activity, and I've been surprised to find wonderful camaraderie and friendship in the writing community as well. Many of you are here today that have supported my writing journey. Poem walking is something that you can try out with friends and even make into a game. Lisa Lickle, who I think is here, my editor, she created a book club kit to add a social experience to reading A Thousand Miles of Poetry. It's free on the WWA Press website, and it has discussion questions, recipes, and games to create a book club poetry party. So today, let's try on what a group poem walking experience can feel like. You can use any shape of poetry for a group poem, but I find that list poems and sound poems are 2 that work particularly well. So let's start. We'll create a list poem. So I want you to go back to your very first poem that you wrote this evening and choose one of the items in your list and drop it in the chat. And we will see how this comes together in a group poem. So find one line from your very first poem, your list poem, and drop it into the chat. All right, let's see what we've got so far. thirsty spider plant browning at the tips, a brown and white striped turkey feather, sunshine. I'd like to invite a deer to dinner, the lingering cinnamon sweetness of tea, the clinking of my dog's collar tags metal on metal as he shakes his head, the purple pillow I bought at a fundraiser, a bill waiting to be paid on behalf of an elderly mother, dog resting on moist grass, staring, towels tumbling in the dryer, phone charger cords wound into an electronic spiral, sunshine yellow walls. It tickled my arches. Geriatric white fridge wallpapered with random photos and papers. Disgruntled dog accepting his bed with soft snores. Empty salad bowl with tangy shimmer of vinaigrette. And now we need a title. If you have a title for this list of fascinating things from all of our homes, you can drop it in. Tuesday Magic. Perfect. I love it. So we have about 10 minutes yet. I'd like to give you some time for questions. And then after questions, if we have time, I would love to hear some of the poems that you came up with. So I'm going to unshare my screen so that we can see each other a little bit better. And we'll open it up to questions and sharing. And as we're thinking about questions and sharing, I'll also have you look back over the 4 poems that you created this evening and see what thoughts you have about how these poems relate. So thinking that you were in one place with one word bank, were you surprised at what came out of it in the 4 different poem shapes?
I thought so I don't know if this is the answer to the question, but I thought the word bank, it's surprising to me that you can take that word bank and go in 4 totally different directions. I've never had a class like that before that was that creative and open-ended, but each of them were different and unique in their own way. So I like that approach.
Thank you, Christy. That's the experience I have as well. I love taking the same word bank, the same place, and then trying it in different shapes. And it always just fascinates me at what comes out and how it looks different through the different lenses.
Trina, has that been kind of your experience when you were doing your poem walking on the trail? When you wrote down your notes and you went back and formulated, did you typically go in multiple different directions, or did you kind of have an inkling about which direction you wanted to go with a piece right away?
That is such a fascinating question, and it's different every time. So I bet you have this experience as well. So sometimes I'd be walking the trail and the words would just kind of come, and I would know right away which direction I was going in. And then other times I would gather a word bank and I'd have to look at it for a few days. And sometimes when I looked at it, something intuitively would jump out. Like I would know right away, like, oh, this is a list poem. Like the one in the Janesville segment, I just looked at all of my notes and I said, all of these things are related. They're all things I did not expect to find on this segment. And I'm like, that's perfect. That's just what this poem is about, is all the things I didn't expect. But other times I'll get a word bank and I will just get stuck with it. So I'll have hiked a segment, I'll have this great list of words, and I look at it and I'm like, I don't know what you want to be. And that's when I try on all the different forms. And I've even been playing with meter and sometimes writing the same poem, but changing the meter. It will be fascinating. Each poem will have an entirely different personality. So there are some segments that I have 7 to 12 different poems just for that segment. And then I've only chosen one for the book, but I have written them out. And that can be a really, I mean, I know it sounds tedious, but it can be a really fun process. And I think it's an excellent practice if you're feeling stuck because it really shakes things up. And then also it gives you permission because when you're trying on a form, I think my biggest block is if I sit down and I'm like, oh, I want to write a good poem. Nothing is going to happen then. I need to sit down and say, I'm going to play with these words and have no expectations. And then when I do that, then a poem comes out. And then later I look at it and I'm like, oh, yeah, I like that. And then I, of course, will edit and refine. Thanks for that question. Did that answer it all the way? Yeah. Isn't that funny how we think we have a consistent process, but it's every day it's different, isn't it?
Hi, I have a question about the logistics of your walking.
Sure.
So like you said, you carry a little notepad along, and do you just kind of go with what inspires you? You just jot some word bank things down, or I mean, there's some places I would think you get don't get much walking done because so, so I'm just curious what your process is.
You must enjoy walking as much as I do because, yeah, sometimes you can just sit and just keep writing in the same place. And sometimes I do. There's a poem in the book on the Springfield Hills segment, and it's a lollipop loop. So the trail goes out and then it circles. And it had four really distinct ecosystems within like 10 square miles. It was absolutely fascinating. So I would walk a little bit and then I would just sit and just listen. And I turned on my Merlin app because there was so much bird song and I just let it record and I was writing down. And some of the birds I could see, but some of them I had no idea they were there until I just stopped and listened. And so I did that in each spot, and it created a really interesting word bank, and it turned into a poem that I really enjoy. And so it does depend on the weather, of course. If it's raining, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep walking. And then sometimes I write down more notes later, and that can be a fun experience. But I really do slow down a lot. And the hike itself, sometimes I walk out and then I walk back, but other times I'll do a bike shuttle. And so I'll drive the car, I'll get out, I'll hop on my bike, drive to where I want to go on the bike, and then walk back. And that in itself is kind of a neat experience because things go so fast in the car and then they feel slower on the bike, but I don't notice as much on the bike as when I do when I finally start walking. And so the slower I go, the more I notice. And that is an interesting experience as well. So I truly love walking. And when I started, I couldn't sit still because of the nerve pain I had. So the walking itself was soothing. I do think that you can just sit in a place and observe as well, if you're comfortable and get just as much out of it. Did that answer your question, Sarah, in a very long way?
No, yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I know it
Thank
said that didn't Mary Oliver walk and write at the same time? And I just kind of pictured you out in the woods. Yeah.
you. Sometimes I am like writing as I'm going, but I do stop as well.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn says, it began with the sound of the sump pump and my animal snoring and took me to questions on where I imagined my life going when I was in the same space as a child. Never imagined it would go in this direction. Yeah, what a cool surprise. And I found that too when I hike on the same trail, if I hike it multiple times, sometimes when I go back to that space, the emotions that I felt the last time I was there come back, like almost like they were waiting for me, which can be an interesting experience. Does anybody have a poem that they would like to share before we wrap up? I know they're all works in progress, so there's no expectation. The trees were holding them for you. Yes. They almost do have memory, I wonder. Yeah, they're all connected underground.
I could share my haiku.
I'd love that,
I
Kim.
read it rather than type it in.
Yes.
Blue blanket blurred gray with cat fur. I still hold you in my arms.
Oh, read it one more time, Kim.
Blue blanket blurred gray with cat fur. I still hold you in my arms.
Wow, beautiful. But wow, and the blanket, it does, right? The blanket's holding the cat hair, and when you hold the blanket, you think of the cat, and wow, and like no emotion words, but wow, like the emotion that that stirs up. Isn't that amazing with haiku as well? Because like I feel it in my heart. Thank you for sharing. Good, Dawn. Oh, Dawn shared hers. Would you like me to read it, Dawn, or would you like to read it? All right, Dawn's poem, Solid Rock Climbs, overlooks lazy river. They both call my name. Solid rock climbs, overlooks lazy river. They both call my name. Very cool. Thank you for sharing, Dawn. Yeah. Oh, the Devil's Staircase segment. That is a beautiful segment. And it is. It's there's like stairs right up this bluff. I can see it. And you are looking down at the river. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening. This has been lovely to see you.
Yes, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. This was it's fair to say, Katrina, this was one of the more in-depth workshops that I've just idled in the background on. I mean, you got kudos from several people in the chat just on the way you structured it. So, this seemed to be of great interest, and it was very, very interesting to hear the way you put things together. So, thank you everybody for joining tonight.